"Your wife is still alive," the black girl said. The billionaire immediately launches an investigation. The room was silent, except for the rapid, uneven beat of his heart. The billionaire's eyes darted across the screen. Security footage he'd never imagined needing to watch. And then he heard it, a trembling, almost disbelieving voice, sharp and unwavering. "Your wife is still alive." Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging like heavy chains. The words hung in the air, impossibly real, yet impossible. The screen flickered, showing shadows moving in a distant alley, the dim glow of a street lamp casting harsh lines across a terrified face. A black girl, barely more than a child, looked straight into the camera, eyes wide, sweat glistening on her brow, and spoke with the certainty of someone carrying the weight of a world the billionaire couldn't even fathom. "What would you do?" The voice of the narrator cuts in, low and deliberate. "If the system designed protect you, turned a blind eye? If every official, every law, every authority you trusted failed to see the truth right before their eyes?" A distant scream, the slosh of water in the gutter, the metallic echo of a locked gate snapping shut. His pulse thundered. Every instinct screamed. He had to act, now, before the storm. Her life was stitched together with quiet moments of joy, small victories that no one outside her neighborhood would ever notice. Amara Johnson, 28, woke each morning to the hum of her tiny apartment on the third floor of a worn, sun-faded building. The smell of brewing coffee curled around her like a warm embrace, blending with the faint scent of old books she kept on the windowsill. The morning light spilled across the chipped linoleum floors, catching in the delicate gold hoop earrings she always wore, her personal talisman, a subtle declaration that she mattered, even when the world acted otherwise. Her routine was simple, yet sacred. Kiss her son, Eli, asleep in the corner of the small living room, check the mailbox, tie her hair into a precise knot, and head to the downtown library where she worked as an assistant archivist. She loved her work, archiving history, preserving stories that would otherwise fade into oblivion, but it never paid enough to lift her from the precarious line between survival and struggle. Still, she carried herself with quiet dignity, a small defiance against a world that often looked past her. Her neighbors knew her as the one who always returned a smile, even when life was heavy. Mrs. Klein, her elderly neighbor from across the hall, would hand her a fresh loaf of bread each Thursday. The local cafe owner, who never forgot her order, always greeted her with a nod of familiarity that felt like sunlight through winter clouds. The sounds of the neighborhood, the distant wail of sirens, children laughing in the cracked asphalt alley, the occasional bark of a stray dog, formed a rhythm that Amara had grown to depend on, like a heartbeat she could follow when everything else seemed unpredictable. But the world beyond her doors was not so forgiving. Microaggressions shadowed her every day. A passing stranger on the sidewalk would clutch their purse a little tighter. A colleague at the library would remark, with thinly veiled condescension, about how articulate she was. Even the official letters that came from city offices carried subtle reminders that she existed in a space where the rules were not meant to protect her. The warnings were small, almost imperceptible, but in hindsight, they were the threads unraveling the life she cherished. Yet, in her personal life, there was love and warmth. Eli, at 6 years old, was her anchor, her morning sun and midnight star. Together, they shared ritualistic bedtime stories, improvised songs, and the tiny victories of scraped knees healed with kisses, arguments over homework that ended in laughter and stolen chocolate squares hidden in drawers. Her sister, Layla, a nurse with tired eyes but a quick smile, would often check in with knowing concern, warning her not to trust too easily, but also never doubting her strength. Amara's life was full, if fragile, like a glass ornament balanced on a ledge, catching the light just enough to sparkle, even as the world threatened to topple it. Evenings were her respite, a pocket of stillness before exhaustion reclaimed her. She would sit by the window, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the soft whispers of neighbors winding down their own lives. The city smelled of rain-soaked concrete, a mixture of gasoline, asphalt, and possibility, a scent she had grown to love because it was hers. It was ordinary, and ordinary was beautiful. But beneath that beauty lurked the first hints of storm clouds. Suspicious phone calls she dismissed as wrong numbers. Strangers loitering too long near the library. Notices of missed deliveries she hadn't received. A shadow across her threshold she couldn't place. None of it made sense yet. None of it hinted at the impending unraveling that would pull her entire world into a chaos no routine could contain. Amara's life was a delicate ecosystem. Love, routine, small joys, community. A life lived fully, quietly, courageously. And yet, as she walked the familiar streets, smiling at neighbors and nodding at the local grocer, the city seemed to whisper a question she could not yet hear. How long before this fragile world she had built would be tested? And would she survive the test? It started subtly. A misplaced file at the library, a whisper behind her back, a glance that lingered a second too long. Microaggressions that she had learned to navigate with careful composure. But day by day, the subtle shifted into the unmistakable. First came the work emails. Polite on the surface, but the undertone cut sharper than any knife. Requests ignored, questions dismissed, her expertise undermined in front of colleagues. "I think you'll find someone more experienced for this," one supervisor said, smirking as if the words were a jest. Amara smiled politely, nodded, but inside, a knot of frustration tightened. She began keeping notes of everything, documenting small injustices, fearful that someday someone would deny the truth entirely. Then the street harassment started. Strangers making comments she refused to answer, sometimes following her longer than necessary, eyes sharp, judgmental. One evening, as she walked home with Eli, a car slowed beside her. A man leaned out the window, hurling words she would later replay in her mind, over and over. "You don't belong here," he spat. The tires screeched as he drove off, but the echo lingered, heavy and suffocating. She clutched Eli's hand tighter, forcing herself to breathe. Her friends noticed changes in her demeanor, small tremors of anxiety, a hesitation she hadn't had before. Late-night phone calls with Layla became more frequent. Conversations looping around fears she couldn't fully articulate. She told herself it was paranoia. She had always been cautious, always aware. But even caution couldn't shield her from the invisible currents of bias and danger that had begun circling her life. One afternoon, the first direct threat arrived. A package left on her doorstep, unmarked, heavy, with a folded note inside. "Stop digging where you don't belong." Her hands shook as she read it. She looked at Eli, asleep in the corner, and felt the icy grip of fear settle deep into her chest. The neighborhood, usually a sanctuary, now felt like a labyrinth where eyes watched and shadows waited. At work, the hostility escalated. Amara was passed over for promotions she had earned, her projects reassigned to colleagues with far less experience. "It's just business," they said when she asked why. But she knew better. It wasn't just business. It was prejudice veiled as procedure. She tried to rationalize, to keep her focus on her son, on her morning routines, on the fragile threads of her life. Yet the world was closing in. The whispering grew louder. The shadow looks more pointed. The first point of no return came unexpectedly. A late shift at the library. The streets were empty, rain slicked and glowing under the harsh yellow streetlights. She was locking up when she saw them. 3 men loitering near the alleyway she had always taken to avoid shortcuts. One stepped forward, blocking her path. The rain slicked down in sheets, drenching her coat, making the cold seep into her bones. "You shouldn't be here," he said. No smile, no jest, just a raw, unflinching menace that had been threading through her life. Her pulse thundered. Eli was home with her neighbor, safe for now, but she realized the danger wasn't abstract anymore. It was immediate, palpable. She turned, quick steps splashing through puddles, heart racing, every nerve screaming to run. That night, she could hardly sleep, haunted by the feeling of eyes watching her from every corner of her apartment building. The psychological toll grew heavier. She questioned herself constantly. Was she overreacting? Was she imagining the hostility? But the threats kept coming. Anonymous calls with silence on the other end, letters with no return address, social media messages that hinted they knew her routines. Amara, once confident and bright, now carried the weight of suspicion in every step. Her laughter became cautious, her smiles measured. She began sleeping with one eye open, listening to every creak, every distant footstep. Yet, even in the face of mounting terror, she tried to fight back. She reported incidents, went to police, submitted evidence. Each time, her complaints were filed away, dismissed as inconclusive. The world's institutions meant to protect had failed her. Every bureaucratic will look into it felt like a nail driven into the fragile safety she had built. And then came the disappearance, the event that would make it impossible to turn back. She arrived at work one morning to find her closest friend and mentor, a black woman who had always been her anchor, missing. Her desk cleared, no note, no warning. Panic gripped Amara as she frantically searched, reporting to authorities who treated her urgency with polite condescension. No one acted, and in that moment, Amara realized something devastating. The danger had shifted from the periphery into her life, into the core of her existence. The slow burn had become a blaze. Her life, one structured around routines, love, and quiet victories, now felt like a tightrope above a chasm, every step uncertain, every misstep potentially catastrophic. Her resilience was tested daily, her courage stretched to its limits. She learned to move with hypervigilance, to scrutinize every glance, every sound, every interaction. And through it all, the question haunted her. Who could she trust when the world had already turned its back? Yet, even in this crucible, Amara refused to break completely. There was a fire in her chest, a stubborn refusal to disappear into fear. Every documented incident, every whispered threat, every slight, built a case for what she knew in her bones. She could not be ignored. She would fight, even when the odds seemed insurmountable, because her life and her son's life depended on it. And far away, in a world she had never imagined, someone with the power to make a difference had just been alerted to her existence. The night was suffocating. Rain pelted the cracked streets in relentless sheets, drumming a chaotic rhythm against the rooftops and windows. Amara's lungs burned with every breath, her chest tightening as if the air itself were conspiring against her. The alley she had always avoided loomed ahead, slick and narrow, shadows pooling like ink. She could hear footsteps behind her, quick, deliberate. Panic set in like icy fingers clawing at her spine. A voice cut through the rain, sharp and commanding. "Stop right there." She spun, eyes wide, heart hammering in her throat. The stranger advanced, face obscured beneath a soaked hood. Cold sweat ran down her temples, mixing with rain, stinging her eyes. She could taste fear, metallic and acrid, like blood before a wound opens. Every nerve in her body screamed to flee, yet her legs refused to obey. The footsteps multiplied. She realized she was surrounded. The shadows of men closed in, the echo of their boots against puddles a drumbeat of imminent danger. Her hands trembled violently, her vision blurred. Eli's face flashed before her eyes, innocent and trusting, and her chest constricted with helpless rage. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught, strangled by terror. And then there was a glimmer of light, sharp and sudden, like a blade through darkness. The Billionaire's investigation team had traced her location. A spotlight cut across the alley, momentarily blinding everyone. Cameras whirred, recording the confrontation in real time. The assailants faltered, surprise flickering in their eyes. Amara's pulse thundered. This was her chance, a narrow fissure in the suffocating chaos. She ran, her wet shoes slapped against the concrete, water splashing in rhythm with her frantic heartbeat. One man lunged, hands outstretched, catching her sleeve. She yanked free, spinning, fists clenched. The world became a blur of motion, sound, and sensation. The roar of rain, the sting of cold, the roar of her own pulse like a drum in her ears. She could feel the mud squelching underfoot, the sharp bite of gravel cutting into her palms as she stumbled. A sudden shout pierced through the cacophony. The spotlight illuminated the alley completely, revealing the men's faces, shocked then furious. One drew a weapon, the metal glinting under the harsh light. Time slowed, every detail etched into her mind. The wet barrel, the bead of water running down his temple, the terrified instinct to protect herself. Amara's knees buckled, and yet, somehow, she forced herself to rise. She could not, would not, Let this be the end. Then came the chaos, a flurry of movement, shouts, the metallic clatter of a dropped weapon. The Billionaire's team had intervened. Amara's heart threatened to explode from her chest. She collapsed against the wall, gasping, rain mingling with tears streaming down her face. The men were restrained, voices shouting, orders barking, and yet the adrenaline refused to ebb. Every muscle trembled. Every nerve screamed with the intensity of survival, the raw edge of terror still slicing through her. And in that moment, amid the chaos, the horrifying realization hit. This was only the beginning. The danger was real, pervasive, and systemic. Her life had been a fragile thread in the storm, and it had frayed to the point of near breaking. The assault had not only endangered her physically, but it cracked open the very foundation of her soul. She understood, in that rain-soaked alley, the fragility of safety, the cruelty of indifference, and the sharp edge of injustice that had shadowed her life for years. And yet, even in the storm's eye, a spark of defiance ignited. Her eyes met the camera lens. The world was watching, and she was refusing to vanish into fear. The clamor of voices, the splashing water, the bitter taste of adrenaline, all of it merged into a single, unshakable truth. She had survived. And survival was no longer enough. Action was required. Her knees shook as she straightened, drenched but resolute. Every shiver, every gasp, every heartbeat carried the weight of the life she refused to lose again. The alley, once a place of dread, now marked the line she would cross to reclaim her existence. The chaos had broken her, but it had also unveiled a fierce, unrelenting core she had never known she possessed. The rain began to ease, a thin mist hanging in the cold air. She could hear the distant wail of sirens, the clatter of boots fading and the faint hum of the city continuing despite everything. And as her gaze lifted to the dim streetlights, she knew one truth. The world had seen her, had witnessed a storm that had tried to consume her, and for the first time, she felt the tentative stirrings of justice. Personal, immediate, undeniable. The alley was silent now, save for the soft drip of water from eaves and gutters, a quiet counterpoint to the storm that had raged moments before. Amara leaned against the cold brick wall, rain-soaked and trembling, and felt the weight of everything she had endured settle onto her shoulders. Her chest heaved, not just from exhaustion, but from the lingering adrenaline that refused to leave her body. Every nerve remained alert, every sense painfully aware of the fragile thread upon which her life had balanced. Eli's face floated in her mind, and she closed her eyes, imagining him safe in her sister's care. She allowed herself a brief, shaky inhale, the first in hours that felt like it belonged entirely to her. But relief was fleeting. The terror had etched lines deeper than her exhaustion, carved fear into her bones. She had survived, but survival alone did not erase the years of small violences, the endless dismissals, the system's failure to protect her. At the hospital later that night, wrapped in a dry coat, a warm blanket over her shivering frame, she reflected on what had happened. The police were now listening. Cameras had captured evidence, and the Billionaire's investigation had escalated to a full-scale operation. Yet she knew the truth. Her personal victory, monumental as it felt, was only a single thread in a tapestry of systemic injustice. Across cities, across neighborhoods, countless others lived under similar, unseen threats. Countless others had been silenced, ignored, erased. Her community rallied around her, offering support, small gestures of solidarity, meals delivered, calls that checked on her well-being, neighbors sharing information about suspicious activity. But even amidst this warmth, Amara understood that the wounds went far deeper than one night, one assault. The trauma, the psychological scars, would linger. Every moment of anxiety, every flash of fear when a stranger approached, every instinctive check of shadows will remind her that the world she had once trusted was not designed to protect someone like her. Yet she was changed, hardened, yes, but also illuminated. She now carried a new power, visibility. The world had been forced to witness her, and her refusal to vanish had become a form of defiance. She realized that the small victories, once private and understated, could now ripple outward, creating accountability where there had been none. Her voice, once confined to whispers, could be amplified, Her story could illuminate the hidden fractures in a society that too often pretends equality is achieved when it is not. As weeks passed, investigations led to arrests, inquiries, and public exposure of the networks that had sought to harm her. And yet, as the headlines faded, the fear and mistrust that shadowed her life remained, quiet yet persistent. She walked her familiar streets with care, noticing every shadow, every sound, every unfamiliar face. Trust had to be rebuilt, slowly, cautiously, but she had learned the depth of her own resilience, the limits she could push, and the undeniable fact that her existence mattered. Amara knew the story was far from over. She thought of those still unseen, unheard, ignored, people living in fear, trapped by circumstance, bias, and neglect. She realized her survival was a beacon, but one that cast shadows as well as light. The systemic rot remained, sprawling and entrenched, and she understood with stark clarity that a single act of justice, no matter how monumental, could not undo decades of invisibility, oppression, or prejudice. As she gazed out over the city from the roof of her apartment, the wind carrying the faint scent of rain and asphalt, a haunting question settled in her chest. How many more lived in silence? How many more were invisible until tragedy struck? And if the world only notices when horror becomes public, what are the countless stories that never reach the spotlight? This story isn't just mine, she whispered, voice trembling but steady. It's ours, a reflection of a world that too often looks away. If it unsettles you, the conversation cannot end here. Share it. Talk about it. Because awareness is the first step toward change. The camera pulls back slowly, showing the quiet streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The city hums around her, indifferent yet alive. A single figure stands tall against the lingering darkness, soaked and shivering, yet unbroken. And as the scene lingers, the question remains, how many more like Amara are waiting to be seen, waiting to survive, and who will answer their call